Just imagine you work in the healthcare industry on the front line or some form or fashion, whether it's at a hospital, whether it's at a health care company, anything related to healthcare, and then suddenly you get the word that your spouse who's unvaccinated is going to cost you $100 to $200 a month. So now with this vaccinated, unvaccinated thing that's going on in this country, that becomes a real thing for one place in Louisiana. Paul Seegert is with us. He is a managing partner for PCS Advisers. Paul's great. We've had him on several times. He knows all the ins and outs of healthcare benefits and consults with people all over the country, California and Tennessee. They've got offices. So we're always happy to get Paul on the show. Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm good. So we have a lot of listeners in Louisiana, and that really popped up on my radar today when I saw that. Tell us the story there. What's happened in with this one place in Louisiana where they're actually saying if your spouse isn't vaccinated that you're going to have to pay extra monthly?
Well, it's a really interesting story. They're taking a step that's unprecedented and nobody has taken before. There have been surcharges for things like smoking and health plans that add risk, but at least in this COVID experience, to add a surcharge when you have a spouse that's unvaccinated is unusual. And so they're saying that if you have a spouse that chooses not to be vaccinated, you're going to pay an extra $100 a pay period, $200 a month, $2,400 a year. So it'll be a pretty significant burden.
Yeah, I can only imagine, though, that this is going to be challenged, don't you think?
It is, and it already has been. Interestingly, most of the challenges that we've seen have not really made much progress. So it will be challenged. To me, it's looking at the economics of health plans. It's an interesting argument that's being made by the CEO. He's come out and stated that this is necessary because the system has spent $9 million on COVID treatment for spouses. But when you look at the economics of what's happened throughout this COVID experience, health plans claims were down 70% for a pretty considerable period of time. And at their size, we're talking about a health plan that would have an annual budget that exceeds $100 million. So it's not that it's not a significant number, but the savings that they've had through COVID is certainly outweighs this. So it does make you question what the real motivation is here.
Yeah, and it's Ochsner that we're talking about in Louisiana, and I think they employ quite a few people. Am I right?
Over 11,000, and even if you did a low estimate of that total spend at $10,000 per person, you'd get a number that tops $100 million annually.
Wow!
And hospitals, in addition to all employers, really, especially those in self-funded plans, saw a real benefit from COVID. That sounds crazy, but their claims were down considerably because we were all unable to go seek normal care. So claims were down 70%. And then when you look at hospitals specifically, they also got considerable funding through the CARES Act. So a system of this size would have received a lot of support also through this period of time, hundreds of millions of dollars, conceivably, from the CARES Act. So it's not really, I don't necessarily give a ton of credence to the financial argument for this, but it's a long-standing reality in health plans when you're a good employer that spouses on the plan tend to be some of the higher claimants that do bring costs to the plan. So it's maybe a new approach to dealing with spouses on a plan, which tend to adversely select a plan and bring a lot of cost.
So do you think, in watching this, obviously other people are going to see what's happening here, could this maybe set a precedent that other companies could look at that and think, aha, maybe this is something we need to think about.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on the legal play out of this scenario. It's been, even since the Affordable Care Act started, or since the Affordable Care Act started, we've seen employers have different approaches to getting spouses off of their plans. UPS is pretty famous for just coming out and saying, you can't be on our plan, period. Other employers have created incentives to get spouses to stay on their own employer's plan. When you're a good employer with rich benefits, you tend to attract spouses that come to your plan because they have health problems, and that drives up claims. So there's kind of actuarial basis for doing it, and I think that's probably the real story behind the scenes here. And if this goes without, if it succeeds and the legal challenges don't squash it, then I would expect we might see other employers follow suit.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think it could certainly kick open the door for an avalanche of other things to happen. It's, the COVID and everything surrounding COVID and healthcare has really turned it into a wild Rubik's Cube, hasn't it?
It's been a wild time. What's amazing to me is that 86% of our costs in our healthcare system, when you break down a health plan, 86% of what drives the cost are chronic conditions, many of which, or even most of which, are the result of lifestyle choices. So while it could be said that those who choose not to get vaccinated could add cost to a health plan, it's somewhat of an arbitrary line. There's lots of things that people do that add cost to health plans. And when you look at the people that end up being hospitalized from COVID, or unfortunately even dying from COVID, they have the same risk profile that drives the chronic illnesses that drive cost in our health system generally, even before COVID was here. So it does add cost, perhaps, but it's also an arbitrary line. I think we have to recognize that. And if we could turn this into a bigger conversation that lasts beyond COVID, where we talk about changing some of those lifestyle choices that have driven cost for a long, long time in our system, maybe we could turn this into a more positive conversation.
Yeah, and then that arbitrary line becomes a little more wiggly, I think, if that's the case, right?
Exactly, that's the trouble.
Right. I can remember that there was the incentives for a long time, and I'm sure they're still in place about wellness. The idea was, right, hey, we'll pay for your gym if you go to your gym, and then that would be the whole thing of promoting losing weight and being in shape. And then to your point of then some of those chronic conditions or things that happened supposedly wouldn't be there. And it was so interesting that a lot of people that had the ability to take advantage of that didn't take advantage of it.
You know what? That's a great point. There hasn't been a single study that can show that any of those programs produced ROI.
Yeah.
People don't like to change, and so those didn't really work. So I think, unfortunately, we're now at the stick part of the story, where rather than incentives that don't seem to move the needle, employers are going to turn more to the stick, and COVID, I think, will be cover for that.
Yeah.
Or at least it seems to be so far, a little bit.
Yeah, it does seem to be. So, Paul, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Well, they can find us online, PCSadvisers.com. It's with an ERS, not an ORS. And we work with employers all around the country every day to help solve this problem, because it's not getting smaller by any means.
Yeah, it's not getting smaller. All right, Paul, thanks so much for coming on.